Well, Martin, as CEO of the Pro 14, these are the good days.
These are the really good days, yeah. These are the days we kind of can count on our hands, number one. And number two, we've been planning for months, if not years, to bring this to fruition. So it's just great to be here, to have the talent that we had today with Conor Murray and Kieran Marmion and Marcel Coetzee, and Josh van der Vlier. I mean, great days like these, yeah.
What is your thinking when you're putting together deals like this? Because they're ultimately what define the amount of people who watch the Pro 14, the level of interest, which then feeds on to the spectators. They're probably the most important aspect of your entire job. So this year, Air are going to show, and for the next 3 years, are going to show every single game. But they're moving away from Sky Sports, and some people have Sky, some people don't have Air. So how do you weigh that up as you're going through these deals?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because you've always got to look at reach. You've got to look at who's got what rights people have got. But I think so. It's from next season. It's from September. Air Sports will be the home of all Irish provincial rugby, whether that's Champions Cup, Challenge Cup, or the Guinness Pro 14. I think that's a really solid message. They believed in our vision for what the tournament could be. And allied to the fact that actually the narrative for a fan is a season of rugby, not one competition or another. I think with Air Sports you'll get that next season.
How would you sum up this season, the first season of the Pro 14? The two South African sides were a very late inclusion. You managed to get it all together. How would you feel this first year has gone?
I think for the first year of an expanded tournament with a new conference structure and playoff series, I think it's a real success, because we've got Toyota Cheetahs from Bloemfontein in the playoffs, and off the back of a very long Super Rugby season, I think they've done an amazing job. Kings is a slightly different story. I think there's a element there where they just need some consistency and continuity rather to keep the players they've signed, and then sign some more talent. But if you've ever been down to Port Elizabeth or the Eastern Cape, that is a huge rugby community with one of the best schools in world rugby down there. And what they need to do through us is allow that talent to stay in the region and play for their province. And hopefully that's the opportunity we've given them.
Is that your biggest challenge for next year, getting the Kings to a higher level? Because if they were an Italian side and they had the record that the Kings had this year, questions would instantly be asked about the future. And also the shots you see when people tune in, and there's nothing worse as a spectator or a TV viewer than turning on TV and watching not even a half-empty stadium, but a stadium that's 9/10 empty. Like, that's not good for the brand, I'd imagine. No,
and that's why we were very active straight away. If you saw the Munster game was played down in George to a 7,000-8,000 seater stadium and looked really good. So I think we've got a job to do to make sure that we're not playing to these big colossal stadiums, number one, and number two, do it slightly differently. Maybe get out into the community, take the province, if you like, around. And we've seen that in Italy too, and we've invested our time, effort, energy to helping the Italians get better through Conor O'Shea, who's come into there. And I think it's a very similar story. Treviso have had the best record they've ever had this season with 11 wins. Zebre the same with 7 wins, I think, by the end, playing some good rugby, turning over some big sides. I think the Kings will be a real surprise package for next year. If you followed Super Rugby, actually the Kings had a great finish to Super Rugby. They had some super players which they lost, and a lot of those guys will come back. A lot of players, Chris Cloete got signed by Munster, so they've got a conveyor belt of talent down there. That's a phrase that's used far too often, but it is true down there.
One of the things it has done is open up literally a whole world of possibilities. Because years we heard about a possible American franchise out of New York, and I think people sort of shrugged their shoulders and thought, listen, it's never going to happen. It's totally impractical. Whereas now, when clubs are willing to go and fly 10, 12, 15 hours to South Africa, suddenly the east coast of America doesn't look that far away. Is that something that is a possibility, something you're in negotiations about? Because obviously there's a very strong New York rugby community, and maybe they are focusing more on a North American league right now, but is it something that you're looking at?
We've looked at it in depth, and we're running it parallel to the South Africa opportunity. And we continue to do that in DC, in New York, in Boston, Chicago, Toronto. All those teams, Houston even, I know it's not on the East Coast, but we've got great relationships with them. What we've decided to do as a company who's owned by the shareholders of the unions, so the IRFU, the Scottish Rugby Union and the Welsh Rugby Union, but now also the South African Rugby Union and the Italian Rugby Union, they're going to play international games there. So that's, if you like, that's that's our ability to talk to a Irish community, a Scottish community, South African community in America. And I think that's probably the right first step for us into that market.
Is that something you're going to look at for the Pro 14, that we may see a Munster-Leinster happening in New York at some stage?
I'd love to do that, or in Boston, or I think that would do really well. I think what we've got to be aware of is that would be taking a game away from the fans here in Ireland, and so far we've decided that's not worth doing. We want to become, with deals like today with Air Sports, we make sure we maximise our potential in Ireland before we look at anywhere else. Having said that, I love rugby, and I want rugby to be big in America. If that means being supportive of the MLR and the guys that are running that tournament, Dean Howes, who we know, then I'll lend my support, and we as a tournament will lend our support to that domestic tournament first and foremost. And maybe that's the way that we can assist rugby in the country.
Club rugby does seem to be changing very, very quickly, and things that don't seem possible, like that South Africa deal, and the money that's coming into the Guinness Premiership, into the top 14 over in France as well, and they're talking about maybe abolishing relegation now in the Premiership in England also. Where do you fit into that? Are you constantly having a dialogue with your English counterparts as to where you might go together?
Together is Europe, so the Champions Cup and Challenge Cup, we're all partners in that competition, the French, the English League and our league. And that's where that dialogue sits, is how do we make the Champions Cup and the Challenge Cup even better. And I think there's some growth there to do. Our teams do incredibly well in that competition. It means a lot to our fans and supporters. You can see that by selling out the Aviva Stadium at no notice at all for a semi-final. You can't necessarily do that in France or in England. So I think we've got a lot to add to that competition. It means a lot to our teams. That's where we all work with the English and the French. I think off the pitch, we've closed the gap to those guys.
Yeah, do you feel you're in a far stronger position now when negotiations do happen, considering the assets you have between Leinster, Munster, Glasgow, Scarlets, the power that's there, that actually the tables are somewhat turning if we were eventually looking towards some sort of a Anglo-Celt league again?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, that, because I think with South Africa, it's almost skipped that further. I think South Africa is a market in terms of the rugby playing population, but also watching population, and commercially it's started making us think even further, and so actually what's really possible. So I think almost if it was a Celtic English competition, it would be limiting us, honestly speaking. I think as the Pro 14 and Guinness Pro 14 with sponsors and broadcasters and the new deals we've done, we've really closed the gap to the English already. So I think financially our teams are in a pretty good spot, and then we can kick on again.
Sepp Blatter once said, I think maybe we'll have an intergalactic World Cup, that we could be playing games on the moon at some stage.
It feels like that sometimes when you're on a flight to South Africa, but I think ultimately it's a time zone thing. And again, rehash all the cliches, but if you're not jet lagged, then you can play rugby. And the problem is, if you go across multiple time zones too often, player welfare is not at the forefront of what you're doing. When you're going, down, if you like, and you're travelling 12 to 14 hours, but you're in business class as a player, and you are sleeping because it's overnight, and you don't have any time zones to deal with changes, then actually the guys I've spoken to think it's a real positive step forward. And then you speak to Josh van der Fleer and the guys, and they think it's the best thing ever because they get to go on tour with their mates. So I know there's a professional side, but there's also perhaps that slightly different side, which is okay, don't get bitten by lions, but go and have a good time out there.
Yeah, is that almost one of the biggest difficulties then with a potential East Coast of America? So there's the time difference, and also from a media rights point of view, when do you play the games that actually they're accessible on TV here and they're attractive to an American audience as well? Yeah. So it's a slightly more complicated set of scenarios than if you go back 5 hours on a time zone from Dublin. Having said that, our tournament is now a conference format. It could move to divisions. It could move to, if you like, we've broken the big hump, which is it's not home and away. It's not just a straight ladder. But if I was a betting man,
I would say let's just stick to our time zones and see how we can maximise the teams that might play in those time zones. And in 10 years' time, or whatever it might be, I think those guys might be ready in America. I think it's going to be a little way off from a domestic point of view. Can we help expedite that growth? Yeah, definitely. Whether that's referees, whether that's how we run our tournament, or whether that's players, coaches. What we should be doing if we love rugby is helping that league really kick on and produce Eagles and Canadian international players, and for them to get to a quarter-final. That would be success. However anybody in rugby does that or helps them do that is I guess open for debate.